Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are very excited to welcome the Blade management team, Brendan Keane and Rob Wiesenthal, to discuss the future of eVTOL, what they're seeing in the industry. And welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Of course. Hot day out there. So maybe you have an intro. Why don't you guys just hit on that, and then we can go to Q&A.
Yeah, we just wanted to set the stage for those who are tuning in who may not know as much as Jay does about our company. And we're quite excited about the progress we've made since going public. Blade is an urban air mobility ecosystem. We started the company in 2014. My prior background working at Sony, I held positions at Sony Corporation America, and ultimately, after being CFO there, became Chief Corporate Development Officer for Sony globally, where I did a lot of work in procurement strategies and also alliances for lithium-ion battery companies. So I got to learn firsthand a lot of the speed and the progress that was being made on the battery side, both in terms of cost, size, power, longevity, sustenance, so many different things, safety, and it was clear the battle on the ground was going to move to the air. So Blade was never called Blade Helicopter. It was always Blade Urban Air Mobility. And the idea was that we were going to take this platform, which really is a service layer, start with incumbent vertical aircraft, helicopters or rotorcraft, and over time, as they become available, move to what we call EVA, electric vertical aircraft, or you may call in industry parlance, eVTOL. And this really required four things we needed to build over the past 6 years. First was a consumer-to-cockpit tech stack that Brandon was very involved with before moving on to focusing on EVA specifically. And that goes from everything from the booking app to an operator dashboard that links our highly integrated operators into our logistics system and our team on the ground here. A network of terminals, of which we have 12, 2 more coming, including 3 in India. So these terminals are critical because most of the airports and heliports that we operate at are very old. Airports are 100 years old. Some of the heliports are 40 years old. And they really are meant for what you might consider charter operations. The ability to aggregate enough people onto an aircraft, so it's both economic for the passenger and economic for the company, requires physical structure where you can do security, health checks, baggage assessment, and then use the in-cockpit technology for computing weight and balance, so you ultimately know how much to fuel, and basically parsing passengers and their bags and making sure that you can turn aircraft really quickly. We cannot do it without this infrastructure. This infrastructure, for the most part, is 100% exclusive to Blade. It becomes even more important as you think about your EVA future, because when EVA is here, it's going to take some time for the infrastructure to be built. So we don't think that the day EVA arrives, you'll be landing on, building tops, with 40-hour flights. We've spent a lot of time, we can talk about it later, about what we think the cost structure is. Obviously, we've built a trusted brand over a long time. We believe we fly more people in and out of city centers than any other company in the United States, outside kind of tourism, oil and gas, military, and call it medical. And we now have 200,000 users, and in 2019 we had 40,000 flyers, and we hopefully expect to have a lot more. I think a lot of this culminated where we had the ballast and the infrastructure and the throw weight to actually start back in 2019 a product called Blade Airport, where we were flying between all 3 New York City airports and all 3 Blade terminals for $195 each way, or $95 with an annual airport pass. We recently restarted that product again for $195, again for $95, JFK only. Obviously, as we pull through COVID, we're being very cautious as how we roll this out. But now we have shattered Uber Black pricing. We're matching UberX pricing at kind of peak times. And what's exciting about it is if you think about the entire experience, when EVA is here, it'll be pretty much the same. You get marketed to by Blade about certain routes, you book on the app, you show up at the terminal, you go in and you get checked through secure, our own security ID and all that kind of stuff that we do in order to make sure that you're safe and who you are. Baggage assessment. We're the first actually company in the world of aviation to have mandatory vaccination requirements for all passengers starting September 7th. So we're excited, about that. And you'll get on your aircraft and you'll have a 5-minute flight to the airport, let's say Kennedy, where someone will greet you in an SUV or another type of vehicle, if it's American, behind the tarmac, or another airline that we're not affiliated with on the curbside. But the experience is going to be still 5 minutes. The only difference will be that aircraft, if it's EVA, will be quiet and emission free. And what that means is, and hopefully cheaper over time, but what it means is we'll have the ability to open more places to land, more landing zones, which increases our addressable market exponentially. But the experience is going to be the same, which means everything we're building around this, in other words, everything but the aircraft, we neither fly nor operate nor own our own aircraft. We're asset light. So we say asset light, we don't mean we have very few assets. We mean we do not own any assets. 29 highly vetted, highly integrated operators who sometimes we represent 70% to 100% of their volume. So the experience is not going to change, but all the requirements will still be there. We'll have the customer, the trusted brand, and hopefully we can have an interesting swap to this new type of aircraft. It's also important to point out that, we use many aircraft, different types of aircraft for the missions. The helicopter that moves human organs, for us, you may not know this, but we're the largest transporter of human organs in the Northeast for transplant patients, is different than the aircraft that would fly you to Boston, different than the one that would fly you to the airport or to a leisure area. So we need this portfolio, and there'll also be a cohabitation phase. Well, we have EVA operating, but also helicopters at kind of the same time. So anyway, that's just a quick, background, of our company. We recently went, public. We have plenty of cash. We collected $360 million of gross proceeds versus a minimum cash requirement to achieve our business plan of about $125 million or so. So I think we're very well positioned to kind of take advantage of what comes ahead.
Great, and let's I guess get into it. What are the specific? How many eVTOL prototypes or platforms have you evaluated? And what are some of the performance numbers you're seeing on the aircraft that are available?
I'll let Brandon, who's our expert here, talk about.
Sure. So eVTOL is often, or EVA is thought of as a new thing. And I think, the projects that are public, Joby, Beta, Volocopter, are really the tip of the iceberg of what has been brewing in the industry for over 10 years. So a Blade partner is a company called Wisp, which is a joint venture that grew out of Larry Page's aviation interest and 10 years of experience in a company called Z Aero, which then also offshot into Kitty Hawk. So really, when we talk about the leading pack of, let's say, a half dozen, we think, most best positioned to succeed and be certified, there's a long tail of manufacturers and designs that I think have created some confusion in the market, but we also see that as excitement. This race to build these first aircraft across, as Rob said, a variety of mission profiles is really just beginning. And we believe that we are allied with the best positioned players for the machines that we know will make sense on our routes. But I think we are in store for a lot of surprises in the industry to the upside. And this is truly the kind of technology that is a rising tide lifts all boats. We believe that the diversity in designs will eventually converge and consolidate into machines that we will increasingly deploy domestically, abroad, and I think really will be woven into people's everyday traffic patterns.
So the first deal we did was with Beta Technologies in Vermont. Kyle Clark, fantastic company. And what excited us about that company was a bunch of things. Number one, we felt their path of certification was path of least resistance. They were based in Vermont, so they understood the issues of weather, temperature that we have here in the Northeast. They were not going to take their eye off the ball and focus on services. They were not going to take their eye off the ball and focus on going public. They are privately well-funded by Fidelity and Amazon, and they picked a limited number of partners. UPS on shipping, United Therapeutics on medical, the U.S. Air Force on military, and Blade for passengers. So that was the first one we announced, and we secured the first, I believe, 20 to 30 serial numbers for passenger use with that company. Very excited about the specs there, and very excited about the possibilities. That's looking at early 2024. I want to say early. It's called 2024 deployment. Our models, by the way, don't assume EVA in service till 2025 internally. We then partnered. I think the next company was Whisk. And I think, that also is a joint venture with Boeing. We have a long-standing relationship with. I think partnering with a big OEM is terrific because, they have the capital. And when you think about this, the amount of capital, which I think might be $9 billion or more, that's been poured in the past year into this space, it's like an Operation Warp Speed for EVA. And I think while Boeing is taking a very measured approach to deployment, we're very excited about the technologies that they have there. Another OEM we partnered with is Embraer with their Eve project, which we've been working very closely with. And then finally, which is something almost a bridge technology, is Magni-X. And that's really important because amphibious seaplanes are an important part of our mix right now for urban air mobility. We do land in city centers. And that is actually just an engine swap to an electric engine that is not only can have the distance that we need, the weight capacity that we need, the right propulsion, but it's quiet and obviously emission free. And quiet is very important to us. And that would be 2023 deployment.
So what are you giving to Beta? What is Whisk and these other potential suppliers, the Embraer subsidiary, what are they getting, and what are the specs on those aircraft? What is the range, battery size for those number of passengers?
So with Beta, it is a very deep deal. This is not a vapor deal. We've basically committed on the part of our operators to ensure that they not only have access to these aircraft, but are able to purchase them. And having financed, tens of millions of dollars of inexpensive helicopters, called inexpensive, $2-3 million for the past number of years, with the likes of Airbus and with Bell. This is our asset-light business model that works. So in other words, we have a lot of operators, when they buy a new aircraft, sometimes the manufacturer will call us and say, hey, how many hours do you think you could do in the Blade platform? Because company A would like to buy a new aircraft. They're financing it. I want to make sure you can do enough hours. Okay, so they finance against the kind of historical hours we have, or sometimes we may need to do a guarantee. But basically, we have assured in contract with Beta that if they produce the aircraft with the proper specifications that they believe they can, that we'll be facilitating our third-party operators' purchase of those aircraft, but we will not own those aircraft. I can't go into too many details about the specifications, but maybe, Bryn, you can talk about what's publicly available. We are talking about 5 seats. We are talking about, I think, the range is out there. Do you want to comment on Beta?
Sure. So Beta's aircraft and their go-to-market platform is the ALIA 250, which targets 250 nautical miles of range. Their concept is piloted, and we believe that that's going to be the first introduction of EVA into the ecosystem. Whisk, our partner, who, again, won't publicly release specs of their certification aircraft, is pursuing an autonomous first approach. But Beta, for example, and you can see their aircraft, their test aircraft flying on Flight Radar 24, put out a 200-mile conventional takeoff and landing flight on that aircraft and have just been ramping up their test program. Joby is part of their Go Public fanfare and show the market, demonstrated a 150-mile unpiloted flight of their go-to-market S4 aircraft. So we're talking about all battery electric range that's within that usable envelope of the commercial missions Blade runs today. Now, of course, we would always wish for battery technology to be greater, but if you don't believe the battery density specs that are good enough today, which we believe they are, it'll be an easy pack swap in many cases. Beta has 5 actually battery compartments that can be upgraded readily, but there are several OEMs who are taking a hybrid approach. It's very well understood that you can take a turbo generator, not unlike an auxiliary power unit from a jetliner, and run that through to charge batteries in flight. That gives us not only a sort of proven platform and an energy density of Jet A fuel that is very reliable at the cost of increased program complexity and maintenance overhead, but there are solutions today off the shelf from very sterling manufacturers that can address that concern. But we believe that, again, the all battery plan has very usable economics and will only surprise to the upside.
And Jay, as you know, part of our M&A plan is buying existing infrastructure. One of the questions you may be thinking is, what if what you say is true, which is EVA infrastructure is going to take a long time, and I think that's pretty much agreed to universally. How will EVA actually be landing these conventional aircraft, conventional airports and heliports, and what kind of changes in infrastructure will you need? We've spent a lot of time with local power companies, with EVA manufacturers. You may see in the early years, literally trucks that are basically electric fuel trucks that get charged maybe 20 miles away and then come to the ramp, not unlike a fuel truck, and charge these EVA. So we don't believe there'll be much needed in terms of the actual physical infrastructure. Obviously, charging stations over the long term should be integrated, but we know we're going to be able to hit the ground running.
So basically, with a company like Beta, you're committing your partners to buy the first 40 aircraft. You'll co-sign the financing is the gist of it?
I want to co-sign the financing.
Just to clarify, the deal is solid for 5 aircraft with an option for 20. We again conceive of those unit counts changing, but we're taking a very conservative approach to rollout. Just wanted to
sure.
talk
So
about the real units.
What we're doing is basically saying all our operators obviously want to get in this business for obvious reasons. Okay. And so what we're saying is, we're going to the extent that we know we're going to find a home for these ships. So, whether it has to be their financing against guarantees or in terms of hours, or these companies want to buy it outright and just be, on our Blade platform, we know we need these aircraft. And sometimes we've had a history in the past where there was a specific aircraft that we needed and we didn't have an operator with it, so we helped facilitate that operator to get that aircraft. That's part of our model, and we'll do it again with Beta.
Okay. Let's talk about developing a competitive. So if in fact these aircraft come and they're all over the place, how does Blade develop a competitive advantage? You're not an OEM. Some OEMs want to provide service, like Joby has said that. How does that play out? How do you compete against somebody like a NetJets that might choose to get in it, or an UP, or an airline? How do you end up competing with some of the established players?
Sure. Let me take that. Look, we're at the heart of urban air mobility. It's short distance aviation, and it's moving people in 3 dimensions, usually in and out of city centers. Just to give you a sense of the TAM of the airport, in just Manhattan alone, 28 million people have flown, pre-COVID in a year between Manhattan and all the 3 big airports in both directions a year. That's a tremendous TAM. We don't even need to penetrate much to make that really move the needle. In fact, our 2024 numbers only assume, I think, a very low, it might be, I think, 6 flights per hour in each direction for each airport. So it doesn't take much to move the needle here. And there's a lot of infrastructure, runway, so to speak, to get to where we need to be. But in terms of the competitive moat we have, it's really the fact that, we have these proprietary terminals at all these places. And moving 6 to 9 people who don't know each other, sometimes doing turn times of 2 to 5 minutes, that's a real skill that took many, many years to do. You want to call NetJets, you can have a 2 or 3 hour turn time, get ready time for to actually get your NetJets and get the ship checked out, and you're doing charters. It's a very different model, aggregating people on any type of scheduled or continuous service. Airport is a continuous service where they're literally moving, every 20 minutes. In terms of the EVA manufacturers, again, we believe that our existing infrastructure is what people are going to be having to use before the new EVA only infrastructure is there. So there's going to be a period of a number of years where They'll either have to use general aviation, they'll make sure that their passengers. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to handle it, but to us, it's really boiling the ocean. You got a lot of companies out there that are trying to build an aircraft, certify it, do it at scale, go public, launch a service, and build infrastructure. We're focused, on, I think the thesis by a lot of investors is that by the time EVA is here, with frankly, a tremendous, will create a tremendous amount of value with very little capital expenditures. Our free cash flow, generally because of negative working capital, is in excess of our EBITDA. That when you get to 2024, you're going to see Blade that much bigger, that many more customers, that much more trust, that much more infrastructure, and we'll only be better positioned for EVA than we are now. So definitely the technology, the brand, the amount of customers we'll have at that point, and this network of terminals, I think that's our competitive advantage. But to be completely straight, we want competitors. If this is going to be the $500 billion business that Morgan Stanley says, there better be more companies than Blade. I think when you think about Joby and Uber Elevate, I think the Uber platform is much better for what they envisioned originally, which is that kind of dark skies, zillions of aircraft, hit a button for $40, something lands on your rooftop, you get in it alone, and you go to another rooftop. That's not what we do. You need to look at EVA as a emission-free, quiet, shared helicopter substitute with the emphasis on shared. When you order Uber on the Uber app today, a driver is coming to you, for the most part, with an empty car. You get in it alone, and you go to a destination. It's almost like a charter, but you're not enjoying the economies of scale of having lots of people in that aircraft and getting to the utilization where you can make money as a company as Blade, where the operator makes money, and where the passenger has a good value.
And there's a network effect then, which the direct point-to-point Uber, if you actually run the test, doesn't actually have. Uber Pool does, but the Uber service itself doesn't. How do you know that Archer isn't going to come out and be the winner, or Joby, and you're subscribed to Beta? Do you have them calling you, asking if you want to buy aircraft, offering you test flights? Like, what are you seeing at some of the other OEMs that are now potential OEMs that are now pretty well funded?
Yeah. So, what I would say is this. Obviously, the world has been changing very, very quickly. We were very lucky when we did our deal that we had double the cash that we needed, I think a couple things that we're seeing. Number one, I think people are starting to understand the complexities of building these aircraft, getting them certified. Remember, up until now, these were R&D projects in mega billion-dollar aerospace companies. So if you had one R&D project that didn't work, you had another one to take it back. The idea that there was just one R&D project that they got to win and they got to be on time and be on budget with a service wrapper around it that goes public, that's a really ambitious task. So I think on one hand, I think the conversations have definitely changed tenor in the past 6 months, because as people realize how much they have to do and what we've already done and what our focus is. But also, if you take a look at the recent T-SPACs, you're seeing 60% redemptions, 70% redemptions. So if a company now has one third less the capital they thought, you could be pretty much assured the astute people in that company are saying, why don't we prioritize in what we promised, which was to build a great aircraft and to build a great aircraft on time. We're rooting for all these guys. We want them great. We want great, safe ships at an affordable price, and we want them on time. It's only going to create more value for everybody.
I guess we'll let listeners read between the lines there. Let's turn to costs. You threw out a $40 number at one point, which seems, to a lot of investors too good to be true. Like, that's a really low number. What does that, if you can fill the EVA aircraft? I don't mean to pick on you. I'm just
No. By the way, I'm glad you pointed that, because those are old Uber Elevate numbers.
Oh, okay.
We do not believe $40 is a reality. We do not believe almost all of the costs that we've seen are reality. To give you some sense, and Brandon will help on the technical side, 40% of a Blade airport flight cost are landing fees, sometimes to the Port Authority. And the Port Authority doesn't care if it's an EVA or it's a blade or it's a this. They're in the business of collecting money. And by the way, these heliports and airports are in the business of selling fuel. So the idea that electricity is free and electricity won't be electric fuel in the future, we believe is misguided. When we take a look at the number of hours they believe they can fly, we think that could be a little bit aggressive given that they're pilot duty hours. And we understand about maintenance, especially in the early years where the tolerance for something going wrong in a brand new aircraft is very different than the tolerance you have in an aircraft that's been in service for 20 years. But I should let Brandon talk about, because he's the one who really did the assessment on the issues we see with cost, because frankly, with EVA, we don't really see like this airport flight I'm talking to you about, that may go down to 125, but we're not in the $40 business for a long time. So thanks for pointing that out.
So, Rob has made, I think, the business case of why we think a lot of these costs are going to stay fixed, even with a new platform or several new platforms introduced. But walking back, what would make EVA cheaper? We got to consider what makes current gen rotorcraft and fixed wing aircraft expensive. Of course, you have pilots, and we believe the initial regime will be piloted. That may compress over time as computerized assist, say, flight protection of the flight envelope and helping that pilot out as sort of a virtual second pilot may reduce their costs. But under the regime, under the current regulations, the hour requirements and really getting those certified pilots dominates. But thinking about that maintenance piece, it's engines. So what really costs an airline in operations is that time to maintenance, overhaul, that full cycle. And with rotorcraft, it's even more intense. So these aircraft are being inspected heavily every 10 hours. And if you think about the mechanical nature of these machines, they're quite good, but they're also metal on metal. What distributed electric propulsion provides is extremely reliable, touchless electric motors, which those hubs, those sort of power plants should just almost eliminate all of the conventional engine maintenance associated with that aircraft. Now, we believe that these are going to be dynamic machines being beaten up by weather and all of their operational requirements. So that MRO cost is not going to drop to zero. And if you look at the costs that we experience today, rips in seats, other, sort of banging up while baggage handling. These costs don't go away because it's electric, but we do think that there's a potential, say, third, maybe immaturity if you can remove the pilot through autonomy, which we think is farther off possible, very promising, but of course an evolution of the regulations, and some of that is a little bit unclear with a lot of support. That can dominate the cost. But if you look at that pie, especially on a short mission, that direct operating cost, that machine time, is not really going to dominate. So again, we think we can make money at helicopter economics, and we believe that the acquisition costs, the operating costs will be realistically par with those machines. And if there's a surprise to the upside, so be it. The real game-changing, transformation here is that quiet aspect of electric aircraft. Getting to new locations closer to your house really just adds that utility. And we believe that we found that customer who can pay the price of the current gen machines, but that utility is dramatically transformed when it's not disruptive, accepted by communities, and even at par unit economics. So that's why we're really excited by that technology. And these machines, again, to win public support, if we look at the barriers, so we talked about cost, we've talked about noise, that's a community acceptance piece, but we've also, not touched on safety. So I think it's important to talk about why we think these aircraft will be safer to operate. And it comes back to that computerized control, that sort of design space that's been opened up by that transformation. And it's really no understatement to say that this is a third revolution in aviation, right? If you talk about kind of the Wright brothers on that biplane age, the jet age, electric really is transformative in that it speaks directly to the kind of safety we expect in wide-body airliners, that 10 to the -9, 1 in a billion chance of something going wrong. There's a lot to be proven, but we believe that the technology is there. Breakthroughs aren't required. So it's that interlocking triad of safety, sound, and hopefully cost, but those two aspects that are really gonna, we think, blow this market wide open.
And honest, in terms of cost, we're dealing with pilots that make Single engine pilots, $45,000 to $85,000 for non-cabin class aircraft. You amortize that over a year. That's not your savings. Your savings is the extra seat you get. And I think for these EVA, there are a lot of EVAs there with 1 passenger, 2 passengers, 3. Until you start getting to 5, I think the economics may not be as strong as they are at Blade.
Well, let me ask, how long do these aircraft take to charge? Because how quickly you can turn them around, it will be important for asset utilization. How big is the battery? And what is kind of the ratio of battery kilowatt hour to range? Like, is 150 kilowatt hour battery something that gets you 150 miles? And sort of at what passenger count? Like, how, in your mind, you must have some set of ratios that you refer to as you go across different OEMs. Where does that come out in charging time, battery size, and range per battery kilowatt hour?
So you have to look at the aircraft kind of on a what configuration are they pursuing basis, right? So if you look at a scaled up multi-copter kind of big drone concept like volocopter, that is a very different energy usage profile than, say, a beta aircraft, which is lift plus cruise. So its mission profile, rather than being a hovering multi-copter using a lot of energy trying to just stay aloft, is get up onto that wing as fast as possible, become an electric airplane, and use that battery more efficiently. So same with Joby, their tilt wing configuration gives them that hover, gets them up, but then transitions forward to fly more like an airplane. And that configuration, we think, is going to be the range maximizing, mission expanding configuration above, say, a more pod oriented concept. And it's because it looks like a helicopter analog. Now, if you think fuel versus battery, there's some interesting dynamics in play to note. So a light single engine helicopter that's burning Jet A, it becomes lighter over that mission profile as it burns that fuel. With batteries, you have to lug those packs around whether they're full or not. So that's definitely a consideration. Now, as I said, a lot of concepts are built around swappable battery packs. So you can control the density as those cells change. But what we have in go-to-market chemistries, kind of off the shelf, sometimes bespoke for aviation, but state of the art is around 250 kilowatt hours or watt hours per kilogram. Sorry, so 250 watt hours per kilogram. We think it really starts to open the design space as you get closer to 350, 400. But even within that, and you have to think of it not as a sort of just battery weight to usage, because you're going to use that battery differently whether or not you have 1 pilot, 2 passengers, 4 passengers plus luggage. So you got to think of it sort of as a function that decays over time. So what is usable range? If the Aliyah is targeting 250, that's probably at the edge of its envelope. And you got to look at car companies like Tesla or other EV manufacturers, right? They have their stated EPA range. And then if you're towing a trailer behind with, 3,000 pounds, it's going to use that battery a little bit differently. And to the point of charge times, the same sort of logic applies, right? So if you think about 1C as the measure of charging these batteries, say it has an hour runtime, flight time. If it's 1C, it takes an hour to charge that battery to full, right? So it's sort of balanced. But if you scale up to, say, 2C charge rates, which means more energy, more heat needing to be taken off that battery, you can charge that in 30 minutes. And then go up to 3C, 4C, and so on. But it also depends on that mission profile. So if you think about batteries and how you're using them, if we're doing a bunch of quick trips to the airport, it's sort of a sawtooth pattern of, okay, I charge it down, I sit at the airport, wait 15 minutes for the new passengers to arrive, get a trickle charge that down, and then kind of go down before you need to dwell for a full charge. And that actually aligns well with, say, our airport or commuter mission profile. If you think about it, traffic is a bimodal peak, right? You've got a rush hour in the morning, kind of a downtime at lunch, and the rush hour in the evening. So we can structure our operations to take advantage of that, right? Charge up fully in the morning, reposition, do a bunch of missions with trickle charges, dwell in the middle of the day. Or again, a lot of these can be solved by having hot, ready to go batteries swappable. But a lot of them have de-risked that with, concepts that are hybrid where you can just gas them up and still get all the benefits of EVA. But we can also solve that problem with capital. If we have a shuttle of 2 aircraft crisscrossing each other in the air, and charge time is not what we would ideally want, we can actually structure our operations to make sure that we're meeting that service level of getting the passengers along the density that we think will be required.
We've spent that a lot of time doing that. Like we spent the past couple of years getting our turn times from 5 minutes to 2 minutes, which is what's going to be important for EVA and for short hop missions. So you are probably going to have a ready machine there fully charged so that other machine can be charged, and it all has to be, basically it can't be visible to the passenger. So it can't have any impact on what we do. So in the beginning, I think you're going to see staged aircraft that are fully charged that take the place of the ones that do need to be charged. The other important thing that Brandon mentioned about, 50% of our flights are city to city, but we also have city to airport or heliport to airport. And that ability to take off vertically, which uses a tremendous amount of energy, but then land as a plane, and then take off as a plane and land again vertically, you have literally geometrically reduced the amount of energy that you need to use. And that is a big amount of the Blade missions that we already fly.
How reliable do you expect the aircraft to be, and how do they do in inclement weather? You mentioned that with Beta in Vermont, if you hit a strong wind, I assume a powerful helicopter can handle that maybe better than a light EVA. I don't know what the data there is.
So it depends on that configuration. And like I said, there's a spectrum of designs and they all react differently. And that's not unlike helicopters or planes. They're really a balance of forces in that engineering space to design a machine that you need, right? So you might have seen those big knobby tire Alaskan bush planes that could land in 10 feet, the extreme short takeoff and landing aircraft versus, a sort of standard helicopter. So those aircraft are going to experience the environment differently. As Rob said, Beta Technologies being in Vermont is very aware of the icing problem. But if you look to Blade's historic mission profiles, yes, we deal with weather and things like icing, but the dominant factor in mission cancellations is more around visibility minimums and in all of the sort of safety procedures that are a higher standard than, say, general aviation of flying your own plane. Part 135 aviation, which we do, that has just better tolerances to improve that safety margin. So it's not necessarily, does this airplane have de-icing equipment or not, or can it be de-iced otherwise? It might not affect the overall mission readiness as much as you might think. Now, like I said, Beta is very much planning on producing an aircraft that is enabled for what is known as flight into known icing, FICI conditions. But that crosswind tolerance is also a key part of the certification process. So when you're talking about safety targets, and that is a margin, roll, pitch, attitude, stall, recovery, the FAA's battery of certification proves in all of those known flight envelope conditions that aircraft is safe. And if you think about turbulence that we all experience in an aircraft, you have less turbulence the faster and higher you go, and the lower and slower you go, it's a bumpier ride. That's to be expected in aircraft that are closer to the ground, such as EVA. But as we said, they have a vertical portion of their mission that gets them into new places, but they also have that cruise profile that's more like an airplane. So they're going to be at altitudes that are similar to other sort of fixed wing, small scale commuter aircraft, and not necessarily nap of the earth being buffeted by those conditions. But they also have what a lot of aircraft don't, which is fully computerized flight protection envelopes. So if you think about drones and where that kind of quadcopter technology is gone, there's several drones out there. You can throw a baseball at them, it'll hit it and it'll still recover, or it'll dodge it. That gives you so much more design flexibility in buffeting those automatically, imperceptibly to the pilot versus, kind of holding the stick, managing all those movements. The aircraft can really do a lot of that work for you. And not a lot of people know this, but helicopters, the way their rotors are designed, actually take turbulence better than fixed wing aircraft. If you think about one big, sort of monoplane wing, it has to flex completely together, and that will move the fuselage of the aircraft. But all of those little blades on a helicopter can sort of absorb those wind buffets and sort of smooth that out. Aircraft in the EVA space will do similar things, kind of by a different mechanism. And, the way they can buffet that and how much power they have in hover versus cruise is really a function of that rotor disc size and that rotor speed. So, if you talk about a quadcopter on one end with with many tiny, fast spinning rotors. That's a different airplane than something like a V-22 Osprey, which has two huge tilt rotor sort of propellers, and you see configurations across that space. So it's going to depend on that aircraft, but this is a design configuration that more than the traditional aircraft are going to be able to maybe achieve something, resembling an ultra smooth, center of gravity independent bit of flight, right? And to the point of weight and balance, which is something that, we operate very, tightly in the rotorcraft space as they're very sensitive. Hopefully the technology and that computerized control of those motors can help us save time by not worrying as much about the weight and balance of the aircraft.
So let's run this forward. If in say 10 years, there's a large number of these EVA aircraft flying around, going from New York to Boston, Boston to Philadelphia, Miami to Tampa, the Alligator Alley. I mean, there's a ton of potential routes. How does the FAA or whoever the responsible party would be manage the increasingly crowded airspace where you have more traffic at that altitude at lower than jet altitude? And are there concerns like FCC flight control communications or issues like that that make filling the airspace very difficult in the way that I guess Morgan Stanley envisions?
Sure. So, it depends on the time scale. What Morgan Stanley imagines, I think quite smartly, in the year of 2050 is very different than what we believe is going to be first generation piloted, kind of squawking on the radio missions, right? So we do talk about the air traffic controller shortage, but the way, even helicopters today and EVA in the future enter airports is very different. They're not lining up with 747s on sort of a slot controlled long approach. They're typically doing VFR or special VFR kind of radio call out operations. And again, if you look at our model, yes, we are adding operations, but we're not adding a dark skies, order of magnitude or 1000x increase of these machines. So it's quite tractable, we think, under the current regime. And what we hope is that this quiet EVA vehicle is going to allow us to land in more places, but that's also going to spread out that ATC demand somewhat. So in a corridor that's going to be high volume between JFK and the city, we might, hopefully, and it's a good problem to have, approach those density requirements. But under the piloted regime, it is the status quo. Now, if we look to the next generation of what the FAA, and I think NASA has had tremendous leadership, kind of on the research front under their Advanced Air Mobility National Campaign, in kind of conceptualizing who's responsible, right? So drone fleets that are privately operated, the onus is on the operators to command and control that aircraft, right? Their C2 link is usually line of sight. Sometimes they can get permission for beyond visual line of sight. And if you think about, when these aircraft become, autonomous, we think there's going to be a supervisory pilot in the loop for quite some time. So even if the aircraft is being more or less commanded to go from A to B and less flown, if that makes sense, there's going to be a pilot in the loop to be doing all the radio callouts and control with dispatch that is just natural to flying in high density, high tempo urban airspace. Now, we think there's room to grow, but the next step actually takes some of that control out of the FAA's sort of bailiwick and puts it more on the FBO infrastructure fleet operator side. The concept they have in the research is, a little bit jargony, but provider of services for UAM. And if you think of, say, an analog of an autonomous trucking company that has supervisor drivers, out on the road, and if anyone doubts that technology, I assure you that the Department of Defense has been operating very reliable command and control links to, say, Predator aircraft a world away. This can be done. Now, that regulatory framework to get us to full unsupervised, undispatched autonomy, that's something that's very hazy. But if we're talking about that spectrum of trying to get our pilot costs down or improve our mission profile in terms of hours, trying to operate missions, outside of that normal duty day, there's a very proven set of comms solutions, which do have interface with the FCC, but it's a tractable problem that flies aircraft very reliably. And we do think that there's going to be a gradient, gradual approach to introducing this.
And so Jay, one other way of looking at it is, if your concern is dark skies, which is, the old uber elevate view where you just see tons of aircraft in the skies and they become dark because of it. The brake and the accelerator is infrastructure. So unless we get the new infrastructure that we're talking about, you're not going to be able to have that kind of dark skies phenomenon. And I think we're just very pragmatic as a company. And, you've heard me say this a million times. It's kind of, we go look at the back of the days of the early content industry, our analogy is really Netflix with DVDs. They saw what was happening with streaming. No one really knew when it was going to come, but they wanted to build a great service, a great brand, and have tons of customers. And then when streaming came on board, they were well positioned. And that's, what EVA, what streaming was to Netflix, EVA is to Blade. And I can remember, having worked at Sony, where we would talk about there is just no way we're going to be able to stream at the same time to all these homes in standard definition a movie. And then it became, HD, and then it became 4K, and now it's 8K. So we know what's going to happen. The aerodynamics are there, the propulsion systems are there, they're flying, the batteries are there, they're only getting improved. So I really think we're in this phase of kind of certification, cost analysis, really kind of incredible diligence and work on the safety side, usability, reliability, and it's not an if, it's a when. And that's the great part about our company is that we know the if is true. If the when's later, we're just that much more powerful because we're flying people in 3 dimensions today.
Has the FAA made any comments about their view on viability and of the technology and the different platforms? And where is your sense of the different aircraft and certification? Like, is Volocopter 2023? You said Joby 2023 or 2024. Like, when does Beta get through certification? What's left to do in certification?
So the FAA and several administrators now have been very supportive of the mission. There's actually legislation that's somewhat tied to the infrastructure bill to put support behind advanced air mobility. And really, this is the culmination of a lot of research and regulatory, I would say, support in amendments that allow these new types of aircraft to be certified. So as you can see in the concepts, it's a blend between, is it a plane, is it a helicopter, is it something else? And the FAA and the European Aviation Safety Agency has also been very supportive in defining standards that are lucid for manufacturers to get over the hump. So when we talk about certification of an aircraft, that's very much done in tandem with regulators. There are published standards. So say Beta is pursuing Part 23 fixed wing airplane certification first, and that's a very well understood concern. A lot of people don't think electric aircraft are real, but there are certified aircraft you can buy. Pipistrel was certified first in the European Union, and a lot of these regulatory bodies have sort of concurrent parallel certification and reciprocity with FAA and vice versa. So when aircraft are built and manufactured in Japan, their agency, JAXA, has purview, but this is a cooperative international regime. Aviation is a cooperative international regime. And our partner Eve, they're going to be built and certified in Brazil under those aviation authorities, but the Embraer business jets are built under that same reciprocity process. So there really isn't a lot on the aircraft side that needs to be sort of modified in the regulatory framework to get them through. Now, Joby, I think, is one of the leaders in what they've shown. I think there are a lot of other lurking announcements that you'll hear from some of our partners in the future. But say Beta has been, very much public about its not only support from the Air Force, who gives them special experimental, validation alongside their public interface with the FAA. So we think there's a through line. We think several are making good progress, and Volocopter, being a simpler design, may get there first. But we also know from lessons with the 737 MAX and other wide-body aircraft that FAA is not going to rush the process. They're a safety agency first and foremost, and they're not going to cut corners. And they've certainly set a high bar, a bar that's frankly higher than the requirements for rotorcraft, which we believe are very safe when operated within those regimes of Part 135, that will only improve the passenger story it's not a sort of blocker other than the one that we think really is that, seal of approval for us to feel safe operating those aircraft and for the public to feel safe flying in them.
Is this a national priority where the U.S. government looks around and says, this is a new technology, we want to make sure that the United States has the dominant, the next Boeing, the next McDonnell Douglas?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at Beta's backers, now they've had some members of the board join from the Air Force, Air Materiel Command. The program USAF has is called Agility Prime. And the Air Force realized that, say, drones were going to be a transformative technology, not only for how we move goods and people, but also for warfare. And this program is meant to give not only capital, but special support, learnings, and just encouragement across many different OEMs to make sure that the United States does not lose that drone gap, right? I think China has been a leader in that technology, and the rest of the world has seen what is possible. And I think the regulators and national legislators have been very much aware of not losing those capabilities. And again, this is something that cuts across all of the things that are relevant to governments and citizens, right? The movement of goods and working across defining drone cargo airspace is, I think, complementary in many ways to the passenger mission. But that defense application has done a lot, I think, to drum up support for these OEMs and the underlying technologies and research. They're going to make this, roll aircraft off the line very soon.
I think to your point also, this current administration, and we have the benefit of knowing the Secretary Buttigieg and his team, when you think about even just ESG, I mean, the fact that this is a green technology is really important, okay? The fact that when we need to be more competitive as City 2.0, and there are other countries overseas that may beat us in that. And part of City 2.0 is having a vibrant and multidimensional transportation infrastructure. So, we may be talking about as Blade 1 year out, 2 years out, 3, 5 years out, but the government is definitely talking, a decade out even more. And there's no question that over the very long term, having a vibrant urban air mobility infrastructure is going to be a prerequisite to be a competitive global city in the future.
And on the cleaner technology topic, do you think there'll be carbon credits or other subsidies for these aircraft as they get going?
I think you're already seeing in an infrastructure bill, I think, in terms of, building landing zones, there'll clearly be some funds there. In terms of the actual aircraft, potentially. I mean, right now it's incredibly well funded. Okay. You can then also see when I'll tell you, one of the things that we're looking at infrastructure is, should we have a plan where aircraft that are quiet and emission free have more bountiful hours, no curfews? Should we be charging larger, higher landing fees for those that emit carbons? I think you'll see things in taxes and things like that. So I think things will emerge to catalyze the shift away from legacy rotorcraft. It's just not 100% needed right at this moment.
And let's just wrap up with this this topic. A lot of people think that, I think, they haven't spent as much time looking at it, and maybe it doesn't receive as much coverage in the media or press because they, I guess they're at some air shows, but they're not exactly flying around everywhere. That people don't believe in the eVTOL eventual story. They don't see streaming eventually coming for Netflix, or they don't see eVTOL eventually coming to Blade or whatever that next technology is. What would you direct people who are skeptical to convince them that this is actual tech that is flying now, that is in the FAA certification process and other certification processes globally? Like, what is the thing or 3 things they could go look at or read or check out that would be persuasive?
Well, I think I'll let Brandon handle the resources, because there are a lot of resources out there. I think the most important thing to know is that these aircraft are flying today, all right? They're being certified for their safety and their viability, and it's being done in a pragmatic manner. Because at the end of the day, if this is going to go smoothly, these have to be safe and reliable. And from our perspective, yes, we'd like for it to happen early, but the benefit of our model is if it doesn't, Blade is just that much bigger, and we know we have a viable business using shared aircraft that happen to not be that quiet and happen to have some emissions, burning 40 gallons of fuel an hour. So we don't think the delta is that different, especially on the cost side to the consumer in the next 5 years. So again, while we're not skeptical of the EVA, we're not sure who the winners. We're not that smart. We're focusing on what we're great at, which is the entire ecosystem, the customer experience, the brand, getting people to, to trust logistics, recovery, all the things you need to do to reduce friction in your life as an alternative to ground transportation. But beyond that, there are resources to the extent people just think this is pie in the sky and it'll never happen, that I think, Brandon can talk about that you'll find helpful.
Sure. So, seeing is believing. I encourage everyone to go on YouTube and look at the Beta Technologies test flights of the Alea, right? This is a real pilot covering serious range as an airplane, not across its full flight envelope, but showing all battery flight can get you usable commercial range in an airplane that flies today. I'll also say that hearing is believing. Joby has published its sound profile compared to helicopters, fixed wings, both in hover and overflight, and just how quiet it is will shock people. And they're not joking. This is a real video. These aircraft are, dramatically going to improve how communities respond to these aircraft. And you really have to hear how quiet it is. And then I guess I'll also say EHang has been a leader in moving people around. We think certainly maybe very quickly, considering what will, be everyday passengers' experience with this, but they're flying humans in their, pod concept into, sporting events today. Of course, on an experimental limited basis, but this is real. And it's a matter of not if, but when, and a matter of not can it work, but will it be perfected across the very high tolerances that we expect from aviation? And we think the answer is yes. Like Rob said, we're betting the trend. We're playing the portfolio just because we know moving people in small increments across different geographies takes different machines. And we're happy to field all of them that work. Because they hit those same axes that we think are just totally, market transforming.
Well, great. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a fantastic review of where we are in the eVTOL landscape. And we hope to do a call again soon. And if you're interested in Blade, you guys should reach out to Rob and Brandon and his team there. Thank you so much.
We appreciate the time. Thanks a lot, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.